Okay, thank you, and welcome back. I trust you enjoyed the morning tea. Before I introduce our second keynote speaker, I'd just like to highlight something that was brought to my attention during the break, and this is an observation of the Wall Street Journal, which was published in October 2023, so just a few weeks ago, that recognises Adelaide as possibly the coolest city in Australia. As a result of its charm and world-class cuisine, picturesque landscapes and fantastic wines. So just a note there for you, Shane. And the good thing is Shane doesn't get to the microphone to rebut that. So it's my pleasure now to introduce our second keynote speaker. He's regarded internationally as a speaker. He is Chief Constable Andy Marsh QPM and CEO of the College of Policing UK. And he'll be sharing insights with us on police legitimacy and leadership in the UK experience. So please join me in welcoming Andy Marsh.
Well, morning everyone. It's good to see you pursuing some great British traditions like morning tea. I was too nervous to participate. I rang up my wife this morning and said, can you give me some advice? There's possibly hundreds of people in this room. And she said, don't mumble, they won't understand what you're saying. So wave at me if I speak too quickly. Well, look, thank you for inviting me to speak. Thank you for the warm welcome and hospitality I've had from Australian and New Zealand police chiefs and colleagues. This is a fantastic country, and what a privilege it is to come here. But I would add a little caveat to that. There isn't any bad time to visit Australia, but there's no worse time than when the English cricket team has just been tanked and Australia seems to be doing well. Where are the New Zealand colleagues in this room then? We almost beat South Africa as much as you almost beat them. Where's my clicker? Can anyone see it? Am I being... Is that it? It's got no arrow on it. Oh, here we go, yeah. Right. So you've got to explain things to me in words of one syllable. Okay, what am I going to talk to you about? I'm going to tell you about the role of the College of Policing that it plays in UK policing. I'm going to talk about what the evidence base is around confidence, what's happening in trust and confidence in British policing and a lot. And I think you can use this. I'm pleased about the Chatham House thing, I can be honest with you. You can use us perhaps to swap some ideas with, but you can also use us as a place that you don't want to go because we've got some problems that I think you've still got time to avoid, in fairness. Policing is a global ecosystem, as we heard from Carmen, the last speaker, whether we're talking about recruitment, retention, progression, standards, use of force, which is a key issue in my last police force of Avon and Somerset, effectiveness, trust and confidence, with so much to learn from each other. So look, who am I? This was me, 1987, big hat, isn't it? Big hat, shiny boots. That was me at training school in Chartmall in Dorset. We had regional training schools back then. And one of the things the college does, and I'll talk more about it, is set standards and set training curriculum. The training for me as a new police officer was the law, nothing else. And so when I got dropped into Bristol and I received lots of abuse from the black community, I frankly couldn't understand what was going on. It's taken me, here I am 37 years later, and I've got a lot to learn in policing and life. That's why I'm still doing this job. We need to train our people to be much more than procedurally correct to work in today's society. And they need to be procedurally correct and culturally competent. So I can answer questions about initial training if you'd like when we come on to it. But one of my experiences at training school, and I almost left, is that I made a challenge to the law of enforcement on homosexuality. Not because I'm gay myself, but it didn't seem right the police should be arresting people back then for engaging in a same-sex relationship. And we were, by the way. But when I put my hand up and said, Sarge, we don't honestly enforce this, do we? It's not what I joined the police to do. I was ridiculed and humiliated, as you can well imagine, and I almost left. My closing report said, PC Marsh would do better if he took the advice of his superior officers. That's pretty bad language in every respect, isn't it? And I did almost leave, and thank goodness I didn't, because I've loved my career in policing. I'd do it again, and I would encourage my children to do it. It'll toughen them up. They need that. I'm going to talk to you about some stuff that I've done. If I've done anything good in policing, it's because I harvested the minds of the free brains of the people I work with, the brilliant people I work with, sometimes the most junior people. And, I guess that empowerment and that listening, that engagement, and I'll talk a bit about leadership, is one of the most important things I think any of us can bring into policing. So in terms of some of the stuff that I've done, I'll just explain just to perhaps give myself the legitimacy to platform some of these ideas I'm going to. I've been a chief of 2 forces, which is quite unusual back home. I'm now chief exec, chief constable of the college, longest serving chief in England and Wales. I used to lead for 6 years international policing. That meant I've led policing improvement missions in Pakistan and Sierra Leone, Liberia, Afghanistan, which was difficult. And so that's where some of my ideas come from, that policing is global and we learn stuff from each other. I was the first chief in the UK to personally issue body-worn video, 4,500 to my officers in 2012, and that started a little revolution in British policing, that's for sure. My most recent police force became the most data-driven, and in becoming the most data-driven, we're able to pilot quite a lot of work around robotics and automated intelligence. So I'm getting the hang of this now. What's the college all about? This type print you're using is very Matrix, isn't it? I want to offer you a blue pill or a red pill for those of you that watch The Matrix. You're pretty mean guys down under. So, the College of Policing, professional body, we do this stuff. But our 3 big ideas, I like the rule of 3, I'll keep coming back to it, different sets of 3. Boosting the professionalism of everyone in policing. And that's not to say we're not professional, there's lots that we are professional with. When I look back at my initial training, and I've spoken to you about that, sometimes when I meet retiring officers and they say the job's not what it was, is it, Gov? And I say, no, thank goodness for that, it's not. So we've come a long way, but we've all got a long way to go. Setting standards, which I put down as consistency. What should we be consistent on? What would the public expect us to be consistent on? What would our officers and colleagues expect us to be? And then where is the evidence base so strong that we should do it this way? And actually, one of my frustrations with British policing is for a profession that should be world-class at understanding and implementing and using evidence, we're often ignorant of it. It includes me. I wish I'd known a lot more about what I know now. One of the things the college does, which I think is important because I'm going to give you some reflections on what I think outstanding policing is that we support forces that are engaged, they're in failure. And there were 6 in the UK, there's now 4, including the Metropolitan Police, and I'll talk about that. Look, just a snapshot of some stats. You can read this. Slides are there if you want them. We license 35,000 officers a year to things like specialisms like undercover policing, public order command, firearms command. I personally believe that a profession as important as policing should have a license to practice generically, and that's something I'm going to keep chewing away at. We're a gateway for all new recruits. That's one of the things that is consistent, and we've just finished an uplift, a much-needed uplift, of 20,000 police officers growth. It addresses what we lost through austerity, and that's something I'll come back to. But in order to uplift 20,000, we took through our gateway 270,000 to test them, and we recruited 50,000. That's massive. That's huge. That's a generational change. And one of the consequences of it, and here's a siren warning for you, is that more than 50% of our frontline officers now have less than 3 years' experience, so they're trainees. That's a great opportunity in many ways, but what a challenge. I think this is about the last slide on what we do. We're also a full what works centre. So this is where I talk about the evidence base of how you solve the problems that matter most. How do we do this? The College of Policing is a relatively small body compared to the police forces I've led, which were 7,000 and 7,500. I only employ 700 people, but one of the things that keeps me in policing is the enticing and delicious opportunity to improve it with a relatively small investment. How can something small change something monolithic, a £17 billion crime and policing system? So we've got, this is a slide about levers. We've got hard levers and we've got soft levers. The hardest lever we've got is that we can write codes of practice, which is law laid in front of Parliament, and we've written codes of practice on things like vetting and a code of ethics. We can ask the Home Secretary to sign off regulations which set rules around promotion, progression, retention. The only reason she can decline is if it's against the efficiency of policing, so that's a difficult reason to decline it. We've got some softer levers, authorised professional practice, guidance, evidence-based policing and training. But I don't ask you to think in a nation and two nations, including New Zealand, which are big, in terms of consistency and standards, what levers have you got? And the levers I think are amongst the most powerful, and I hope it's a sort of takeaway thing, is data is a lever. How do you use data and factfulness? Values-driven leadership is a lever, and so are standards. Now, I promised to talk about what's happening in terms of confidence in policing, and I am going to be factful, so I'll give you some data about this. 3 different lenses. I'll pop the stories up so that you can have a look at it. Satisfaction. How do people feel, looking backwards, about their experience with the police? And actually, we touch a lot of people with our services every year. What do they think of it? And I'm afraid to admit that in England and Wales, we've become something of a placebo. We're not as effective as we want to be and we need to be. Trust, looking forward. What would people expect from us? And I've already mentioned the Code of Ethics. The Code of Ethics tells the public what they should expect from us, and I intend very soon to relaunch a fresh Code of Ethics with 3 principles. I've not got time to go through it now, which hopefully will start rebuilding trust in British policing. And then legitimacy. Have the police got a right to exercise their authority? And we heard from Carmen about protest in her jurisdiction where sections of the community felt they didn't have the right. Now, the sweet spot in the middle is if we get these three things right, actually we will build confidence. And I'm going to talk about some of the initiatives that can build confidence. Not all of them, because that would be impossible. Right, you can't really get into this without understanding the context. You guys understand the context just as well as me. This story about George Floyd, the first I heard about it was when my teenage daughter spun her phone around in my kitchen and said, "Look at that, Dad. Is that what you do at work?" That's pretty chilling, isn't it? And that illustrates the ubiquitous nature of the term policing globally. We're all connected. Now, actually, I was the first UK chief, by a long way, to actually say that that was an outrageous incident. My communities were very multicultural. But days later, the statue of George Colston was being pulled down in a 10,000-strong protest in Bristol, and my commanders, trained under the College of Policing Public Order Guidance, decided it wasn't a sensible idea using the national decision-making model to intervene. They had 2 minutes to make the decision, and I stood up publicly on the media, I think it did get some global coverage, according to my brother in Australia, to explain why I felt it was appropriate that my officers hadn't started a riot with the black communities of Bristol over the statue of a man who made his fortune through slave trading. I don't regret that, but it did almost cost me my job. And the headline in the Daily Mail the next day was, Home Secretary reads the Riot Act to Chief Constable. Now, I know that this is Chatham House, but I'm not going to tell you what happened between me and the Home Secretary. But it was a tricky moment. But the people of... There's a wonderful bit of understated rhetoric. But actually, the people of Bristol appreciated what I did, and Bristol would have burned. I've dealt with riots in Bristol. I've been on the end of bricks and petrol bombs with my officers and as a PC. I think we made the right decision. The black mayor of Bristol, the only Afro-Caribbean black mayor in the whole of Europe, said that it was a culturally competent, sensible decision to make. Anyway, this arrow of shame ends up with the Dame Louise Casey inquiry into the Metropolitan Police, which you will have heard about, where she branded the Metropolitan Police as misogynistic, institutionally racist, and homophobic. Some pretty damning stuff in there. There are a couple of disgraceful examples of officers' misdeeds. A man called Carrick has become the convicted most prolific serial rapist in British criminal justice history, and he was a serving police officer. A man called Cousins, a serving officer off duty, pretending to enforce COVID regulations, abducted, raped and murdered a young woman. So we have got some mighty problems to face. In terms of the use of force, I've popped an Australian example down the bottom about the elderly lady that was tasered. But I even noted this week about local concerns on the use of force of a man with a taser incident in South Australia. So just to illustrate these issues now, as Chief Constable of Avon and Somerset, a culturally diverse area, I became thoroughly fed up of what felt like pretty much most weeks explaining, justifying, apologising for, excusing interactions between my officers and the public, which may have been procedurally correct, but certainly were culturally incompetent and could have been avoided. Now, I'll talk to you about one of the pieces of the evidence base that we've implemented nationally that I think is going to help tackle that in a minute. What I would say, this is not about a few bad apples. This is about a culture that needs to improve and change. And the sooner we get our heads around that, the sooner we're going to address it back home. I'm not lecturing you, talking about my own jurisdictions. Some chiefs would say this is a metropolitan issue. I'm telling you, this is not a metropolitan issue. What's the college been doing about it? Well, first of all, I used to be a murder detective. You clear the ground under your feet. So one of the first things we did was rewrite the code of practice, which is law on vetting, so it's laid before Parliament. A couple of controversial things with this. I mean, the big idea, number one, was no vetting, no job. And Sir Mark Rowley has said he's got hundreds of officers who he doesn't trust with the public. This code of practice will give him the permission to exit those people who are not fit to wear the uniform. And we're already seeing that happening, and the jobs are being held up when they're challenged in judicial review in court. So we're clearing the ground under our feet. The second big idea with this is that the College of Policing doesn't trust police forces to do this right forever. We'll move on. Policing loves a crisis. We will licence and accredit and train vetting staff every year. And if you're not accredited as a vetting unit, you don't do any vetting. Not that popular with other chiefs, necessarily, but I think it's the right thing to do. I think you wanted to hear a bit about what's happening in the Met. I sit on Mark Rowley's turnaround board. I was in contact with him last night, and he is having, I think, an incredibly difficult time right now with protest. He wanted to talk to me about that. He has been publicly criticised today in the media by the Home Secretary, which I'm not quite sure where that leaves his operations at the weekend, but I think in a very, very difficult place. But Mark was appointed in July 2022. He launched this turnaround plan, which has now been rebranded as a new Met for London. I support him on the advice of it. I like his rule of three thing. Less crime, higher standards, more trust. I like that. It's great. Works for me. What's the evidence base say about those three things? And that's where the college comes in to support him. So examples of where we're supporting him is he's delivered a week's training to all of his first-line supervisors, and he's followed the curriculum, talk about leadership later, of the College of Policing for that. We're piloting level 3, which is Chief Inspector Leadership with him. We are going to pilot with him the opportunity to professionalise neighbourhood policing. We call it PNP 1 to 4. Level 2 is for beat managers, level 4 is for area commanders. So that will be accredited training. We are fast-tracking Operation Soteria, which is an effort to improve rape investigations into his organisation. I'm rattling through just a few things here. We are piloting behavioural change around misogyny with him, and I'll say a bit more about that later if I've got time. And I sit on his data quality improvement board. It's not about data quality, it's about how do you use data to drive change and improve policing. A couple of things just to think about. He's decided quite publicly not to engage in any major structural reform. This is questions for all as chiefs. His view is that it will take him 2 years to do that, by which time he'll have missed his opportunity to improve standards. He has had a major clear-out of his senior leadership team. And it's a mildly amusing anecdote. When I took my second chief's job, I was with Bill Bratton in New York, advising him on body-worn video. And I said, Bill, I'm about to do my second chief's job. What's your advice? And he said, Andy, you should find the right person and sack them. I was quite shocked, but Mark has created a completely new leadership team. And I would say, as a chief, and I'm chief of the college now, if you've got a vision, part of the art that you do is how hard can you push that organisation without breaking the organisation or losing the people in it, neither of which you can afford to do. Not going to say too much about this, other than to say there are some things the police can't influence, which we're sometimes unfairly held to account for, and there's sometimes things that we can. We have a very significant programme of work about managing demand within British policing. One of the examples is right care, right person, about trying to get mental health providers to provide the sort of services that only they can provide best to people who are in crisis, and we get drawn into that. What I would say, if you want your policing to be world-class, there needs to be absolute clarity of intention from the organisation, the leaders within the organisation, about what you want to be best in the world at. Now, one of the things that Mark Rowley said he wants to be best at is the best neighbourhood policing ever. So that's why I'm helping him with his evidence based on that. We'll probably come back to that. Look, a few factoids. Are the police doing a good job? Red, yes. Purple, no. Grey, don't know. There we see the crisis illustrated. The 18 to 25 age group, by the way, are much higher on don't know. So maybe the young people have got an open mind about what's happening in policing. This is much more complicated, and I show it to you because there are three chunks to this. The chunk on the left, there's lots of indicators here about satisfaction and confidence. So, you can read, if you can read it, that's what it is. The chunk on the left where it's improving was a moment where policing was investing in neighbourhood policing, and we were implementing new laws like the Crime and Disorder Reduction Partnership, the theme of the conference, where actually we were working with other agencies to tackle the causes of crime, cut crime. Look at the results we were getting. The bit in the middle, unfortunately, this is the bit that I've largely been a chief for, 10-year period, managing austerity. I took £80 million revenue out of my first organisation as chief, 1,500 officers I cut. But policing was such a solid, monolithic, high-performing industry, if we call it that, that actually the big ship, the big tanker kept on sailing. But I think many of us knew that this is going to go wrong. These cuts and these changes are unsustainable. And then you see the bit towards the end where the gaps for COVID, but that's the cliff edge. Events, COVID, failing performance, the reasons why this has not gone well. In terms of what can we learn from the rest of the world, you'll be pleased to know that this is a comparison. Australia, in a competitive world, are 5% above the United Kingdom. 2022 this is, if it's not got the date on it. I asked where New Zealand was, and they didn't take part in this survey, but I looked at some comparative 2022 stuff. They were up there with the Netherlands, so well done, New Zealand police. We're all envious of you. Some of the detail around why this might be happening, this red line are the number of people that we're charging. And look at that, that's declined from 15.5% to 5.6%. I don't know whether your stats are the same, but our criminal justice system is in crisis. The blue line shows where the public are withdrawing their support for prosecutions. It's gone massively, from 8.7% in 2015 up to 26% last year. I would call it the scissors of doom, which is a cheery old thought, isn't it? What's happening in our criminal justice system? I mean, a couple of things. I like my stats. I want to be data-driven. I can factfully tell you that it takes 5 times longer to build a prosecution file in 2023 than it did 20 years ago. Now that's progress, because we're doing loads more disclosure. We're doing digital investigation. I say it's progress. Higher standards of prosecution? I don't know. I don't think it is progress. Not all progress is good. But unless policing, and this is where we are in the UK now, this has come right to the end of the the story bit, unless we can prove we're actually capable of catching criminals and keeping people safe, we don't have the right to do anything else. So we are very much refocusing. This is a complex slide. The only reason I put it up here, it shows that rape charging rates in the United Kingdom most recently are less than 2%. We're addressing it through work called Operation Soteria Bluestone, which started in my own force. I'm very proud of it. You're going to have a different voice now, because I've brought a colleague from the College of Policing in my pocket. He's going to speak to you about what we know about internal and external procedural justice, because it's a little bit too complicated for me. It's going to take a couple of minutes. Watch this, and I'll push on through some other ideas that we're doing to solve this.
Hello everyone, my name is Paul Quinton. I'm an Evidence and Evaluation Advisor at the College, and Andy's asked me to say a few words about procedural justice and its close cousin, organisational justice. I'm sure most of you have heard of procedural justice. It's become one of the most important and influential criminological theories over the last 20 to 30 years. But for those of you that haven't, I'm going to provide you with a quick sort of recap and summary. Procedural justice focuses very much on the idea of police legitimacy, the public giving its consent to the police because they think that the police share its values and the police are on their side. Now, there's a huge amount of research internationally and in a range of different contexts that shows that where the police have the consent of the public, they have that legitimacy, members of the public are much more likely to cooperate with the police and comply with the law. So the sorts of things that we're talking about, is people call the police to report crimes or suspicious behaviour. They're more likely to take part in problem-solving activity, and they're much less likely to break the law. But where does this sense of police legitimacy come from? There are a number of different factors involved. Effectiveness plays a part. The idea that the public see the police as being good at reducing crime, keeping order on the street and catching criminals, but it overall has much less of an influence on police legitimacy than other things. Distributive justice is really important. This is the idea that people don't feel that the police underprotect them or over-polices them. So we might think about the kind of marginalised communities in our countries where they may feel that the amount of policing they receive is unfair. But by and large, the most important influence on police legitimacy is the perceptions of police procedural justice, the public feeling, seeing that the police make fair decisions and treat members of the public respectfully whenever they have contact. So what we see here is kind of soft policing, the quality interactions, ultimately have hard outcomes because they can lead to crime reduction and greater public cooperation. Okay, so given the importance of procedural justice, how do we encourage officers and staff to take that approach when they interact with members of the public? And similarly, how do we encourage them not to cut corners, to be more consistently professional, and to go that extra mile to deliver a good service to the public? Well, the research evidence suggests that procedural justice also works internally within organisations. We know from research that the college has carried out and from other studies across the globe that when officers and staff feel that sergeants and more senior leaders within the organisation make fair decisions and treat their colleagues with respect, and also when they feel that they receive a fair share of the organisation's pie in terms of resources, rewards and recognition, they're much more likely to identify with the organisation, internalise its values, feel confident in their authority as a police officer, and conversely, they're much less likely to identify with a cynical subculture which can often develop in police forces. Now, taken together, where officers can have that loyalty and pride and confidence, they're much more likely to say they'll interact with members of the public with procedural justice, to treat them fairly and with respect, and to go the extra mile to help their colleagues, and a lot of kind of other behaviours that would kind of benefit policing organisations. Okay, so a few take-home messages then. Firstly, that by treating somebody fairly and with respect, you can encourage them to kind of either have confidence in the police or their own authority, and that becomes a teachable moment for them, and they're more likely then to kind of engage in positive pro-social behaviours, whether that's not breaking the law and cooperating with the police or kind of following the organisation's values and following its rules. unfairness represents a really significant organisational risk because it has this potential to generate a cynical subculture. So I think that puts an emphasis on leaders within forces to really understand and get to grips with the things that their colleagues and other members of staff feel are unfair, and then doing something about it. Certainly in the UK context, this may be things like promotions and access to learning and development and who gets time off at Christmas, those sorts of things, really understanding those things that annoy the line. And then lastly, it's really important to recognise that it can take a very long time for trust to build up, whether that's amongst the public or amongst officers and staff within the organisation, but it can take only kind of one incident or one moment to lose that trust. There's a great Dutch proverb that says that trust arrives on foot and leaves on horseback. So it kind of just shows that you have to be really attuned to some of the risks of perceptions when you're taking action around procedural justice. Thank you. That's all I wanted to say, and now we're going to pass over to Andy. Thank you.
So I'm really lucky to work with people like Paul. Fantastic advice, and he's explained it better than me. That evidence base is a significant reason why I did one of the, I think, most impactful things I chose to do as a chief in my last force, and that was change the values to include inclusivity and kindness, brackets caring. That internal environment, if you want people to care for people having the most difficult day of their lives, you can't possibly expect it if your organisation is unfair, unjust and unkind. And policing is a tough profession. It doesn't mean we need to be like that. Okay, three big ideas really. I'm going to leave a bit of time for questions, I hope. One is about leadership, because that is about inclusive, people-focused leadership. I'll come back to it briefly. The second big idea is around data, and you'll see data on this slide. I'm just going to bookmark a couple of initiatives, because the third big idea is there are 101 initiatives that you can take to drive trust and confidence. Like, choose which ones and be serious about them. You probably heard of the English cycle coach called Sir David Brailsford. I think he's somewhat disgraced now. And my Australian friends used to rib me that we only won sports at the Olympics we could sit down doing, like rowing or cycling. But actually, he promoted a theory of incremental improvements, 1,000 incremental improvements to make the difference. So leadership, data, incremental improvements. But look, stuff on here. Conflict management training is one that I will bookmark because I said to you about how I felt about procedurally correct but culturally incompetent use of force. We at the college have reformed our use of force training. We now call it police public safety training. It used to be called police officer safety training. Police public safety training. It's about safety of the public. And two big ideas. One is it's around scenarios not moved because scenarios happen in the real world. And the second big idea, it's about using body-worn video to look at de-escalation opportunities at every moment. Now, the evidence base from a big force showed that that training resulted in much, much higher levels of officer confidence on the use of force and de-escalation. And actually trying to tell a police officer they can't de-escalate is like trying to tell a bloke they can't drive. You just don't do it. So look, something's worked there, hasn't it? One less use of force per officer per year and a reduction in assaults on officers. So we're rolling that out across England and Wales. Just because of time, I'm not going to talk about the other stuff. If it catches your attention, you want to ask me, you're welcome, inside or outside of this. Operation Soteria Bluestone is the rape improvement plan that the college is a key partner on. We are responsible for the target operating model, and by that I mean the process by which rape is investigated, and we're also responsible for all of the learning. But just an example about consistency, it used to be the case that the number of trained rape investigators in England and Wales was a few hundred. We will have hit 2,000 specially trained officers by next year, date next year. Now actually, heaven forbid, my girls were subject to that sort of crime. There isn't anywhere in the world I'd want that to be investigated by someone who wasn't trained. So that's an example of what the college is doing about consistency. This is interesting, though much too much to take in. This is about behavioural change. It's one of the things we're helping the Met with. It's a cultural behavioural change using a model called COM-B. COM stands for capability, opportunity, motivation, equals B, behaviour. And so look, you can apply this to if you want to start somewhere safe, why can't your police officers build good quality prosecution files? Question 1, have they got the capability? 2, opportunity, time. 3, motivation, leadership. And then you can build a plan that tackles it. We've dropped this model into misogyny in the workplace, and how do you tackle it? Through hundreds of interactions with focus groups, we came out with well over 100 barriers to tackling misogyny, ranging from the blue line of solidarity that we've got at each other's backs, to you can't do it because they won't support me if it goes wrong, through to people not being confident in the outcomes, not confident they know how to intervene, embarrassed. Misogyny is part of our society. Why can we make any difference here? And actually what you'll see down the bottom with the shaped pieces is that we've come up with 12 interventions. I'm really happy that we shared you with them, but these are being piloted on an evidence-based trial across England and Wales, including the Metropolitan Police, and we will chase misogyny out of policing. When I joined policing, misogyny was hidden in plain view. Racism wasn't far below the surface, and homophobia, never mind plain view, is all over the organisation. These skills that we're training through this cultural change reads across. I'm going to try and leave about 10 minutes for the end. I talked to you about big ideas, data-driven policing, incremental improvement of evidence-based products, and then leadership. Through austerity, our policing jurisdictions pretty much cut our leadership and training academies first. And whilst I've been very lucky to have benefited from a fair bit of leadership training, going right up to the chief officer level, where if you're going to be a chief officer, you've got to have a full lobotomy. That's your training. The people that have followed me have not nearly been so lucky, and they've sort of had to make it up as they go along. And so we are in the middle, literally in the middle of a 3.5-year plan to launch a National Centre for Police Leadership. There's a number of things that we've done through research and benchmarking inside and outside of policing, including globally, looking at Australia and New Zealand as well. 5 levels of leadership you can see there, and we heard Carmen say that everyone's a leader. Level 2 is first line, and I would say all of you in the audience, think about your careers, whether you're an officer or a staff, and think about the best time of your life as an officer. You would have thought about making a difference, being part of a team. You would also probably have thought about being recognised for going the extra mile, that poor behaviour or bullying was absent, or it was called out and dealt with appropriately. At the centre of all of this is a good leader, and I hope you can think of some role models. And I've heard it said that you're not a leader until you've made 10 more leaders, so I'm sure you've made many. But for those reasons and more, we started at level 2, and we also started at the executive level because we had massive shortage of people coming through. So what we've done is define standards at each level, define new promotion processes, define curriculum and training and professional development before, at and after promotion for each level consistently across the whole of the country. And we continue to collaborate globally, and it's my great privilege to be working with the Chicago University and Police Crime Data Lab with their experiment and police leadership in America. I think, having looked at forces that fail and forces that succeed with His Majesty Inspector of Constabulary, those that invest in leadership never fail, and they tend to do well. The other critical success factors that I see in the good forces is that they're able to operationally and strategically problem solve. And what do I mean by that? Tactically and operationally, what drives confidence the most, the evidence base says, is that the police solve the problems of crime and antisocial behaviour that matter most to me and my community. So that tactical problem solving. You can't do it without partnership, by the way. At strategic level, and we've heard it today, and I've shared this with you, recruitment, that's a strategic problem. How are we going to solve that? We won't do it on our own. We are not kings and queens of our own castle. So I would say that the ability to problem solve is another factor of an outstanding police force. And you cannot do that without influence. So if we start to think about what the definition of world-class leadership in the 21st century, it's not what I grew up observing from my chiefs, who actually controlled everything. They were masters of their own destiny. We're not masters of anything. And how do we work with our partner agencies to reduce mental health demand? How do we work with our communities to cut crime? How do we work with Walmart or Coles or your big people to deal with recurring crime and offending patterns there. Problem solving, second key success area. And piling on the third one while I'm there, you can't problem solve at strategic or operational level unless you understand your data. And policing at home doesn't understand its data yet. So we need to fix that problem. And that's why I'm bidding for the College of Policing to set up a National Crime Data Lab for England and Wales. Right, we have got a little time. Is someone going to come and help me take some questions? Tracy is. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. We are actually out of time, sadly. Yeah, I know, that's a little bit of a furphy.
I'm sorry about that.
That's all right, no problem at all.
If we haven't got time, that's fine.
That's okay.
I'm here all day.
I was going to say exactly that. You've taken the words out of my mouth. You are going to be here, which is fantastic. You did put some great questions on the app. I know for a fact that Andy will be very happy to take the questions out of session and have a good chat with you all. Can we all thank Andy for his session? Oops, he's wrecking the place as he leaves. Sorry to keep us moving on, but we are transitioning now at this point in time into different rooms, so that's why we've got to keep things moving along. For those of you that don't want to remain in this session, now is your time to exit, and we've got a very quick turnaround time, so only 5 minutes. If you can make those changes as quickly as possible, and we'll get into our next sessions. Thank you.